of the Provincial Treasury, your MEC indicated to me, I don't know whether she didn't want this briefing. She wanted to be sure. I said, no, the briefing is going to carry on. We also want to welcome you, accounting officer, and the whole team. Thank you very much for coming. So we are moving to the second item of the agenda because we have got an FFC briefing. The Finance Portfolio Committee of KwaZulu-Natal is working very close with the FFC, so we can't miss their briefing virtually. So apologies, Pat, did you receive any? Oh, Honorable Rashbansi, we all know what happened to her family. We hope that she is coping with the situation. On the constitution of the meeting and the agenda, we are going to jump all those. I don't see your MEC. The interview, no, I will allow her. And then pray, no, after you have done the briefing, if she doesn't enter, so that she makes the remarks. Then we are handing over to your accounting officer and your team to brief us. We are going to do something that we have never seen in the legislature, where the Finance Portfolio Committee is expected to debate the midterm budget performance without hearing. I tried to knock sense to others. There's one thing that I don't believe in, to do things for compliance purposes. I don't. There's one thing that I believe in, is the engagement between the committee that does oversight and the department in order to deal with those things that we see as black spots in the performance of the department. But unfortunately, this is the situation. We are handing over to you, accounting officer and your team, to table. You start with the adjustment. I know on that one you'll be summarizing. Also, we have got it very, very well when the MEC was presenting and all the stuff. So we are going to summarize that one. Yeah, and I think the summary will be very, very good. So we're handing over to you, Honorable MEC, for the remarks, or you like to add the acting. To you, acting MEC for Finance, we're handing over to you, Honorable Member.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Greetings to you, to the honorable members of the Portfolio Committee, to the team from Treasury led by SOD. I want to thank the opportunity. Chair, I was hoping that by this time I won't be acting. But no problem, because we are all at work. We really want to thank the Portfolio Committee for giving us this opportunity to come and present the adjustments, estimates for this time of 2022-2023, and we're hoping that we are taking cue from the National Treasury, which is the Minister of Finance, who tabled his, and now it's our turn as the province also to deal with the adjustments as the Act says. But without taking much of your time, Chair and honourable members, may I ask the HOD just to briefly take us through as I presented. I've just come from the presentation, and thank you very much for allowing us to present before the committee, and ask for the support from the committee as we will be continuing and doing the debates afterwards.
Good afternoon, Chair, honourable members, our acting MEC, who we really want to thank for stepping in and taking on this role and delivering a very succinct budget speech. Chair, we've got the whole budget team here, headed by Nelly Shezi. including you recall last time we invited our SAICA graduates, and they are with us as well, just to also give them further exposure. And some of them are actually already budget analysts for some of the provincial departments. So we're seeing those young people coming through, and it's wonderful to see. Chair, I'm going to be very brief. The MEC did go into a lot of detail in her speech. I'm going to go straight into slide 6, where the funds that have been allocated by National Treasury amount to 3,198 billion. 2.1 is provincial equitable share, and 1 billion is made up of conditional grants. In terms of the equitable share, this is made up of 48.5 million to social development, particularly for the disaster funding, and 2.139 was specifically for the 3% increase in salaries. 3 departments indicated they could absorb the costs, and so the balance was then split amongst the respective departments. You'll see that on the next table on slide 8. In terms of what was calculated by the department, whether they needed the funding, what funds we have available. As you can see, there is a shortfall once again. We only received 2.1 billion from national, and yet the departments required 2.5 billion. So there obviously is a shortfall that departments are going to have to deal with. Additions to the conditional grants, the 1 billion is made up of education. All 3 of these are towards the disaster, 95 to education, 589 to transport, and 325 to housing. The net financial position, as we indicated, and there is a detailed table right at the end of the budget speech, which gives an indication of how we ended the financial year, underspending by 23 million and undercollecting by 75 million. Our net position was then 45 million. We then had the contingency reserve added to that, giving us 395. We received requests from departments for additional funding of 3.6 billion rand and rollovers of 133 million rand. Given the financial position, we were unable to approve any of these requests. So the balance of the 395 was then allocated as follows. The approved conditional grants of 113 million rand for the NSNP grant of 53, ECD 38, and Community Library Services grant 20 million. Then there were 44 million rand was not approved, and this had to be returned back to the National Revenue Fund. And this is in the main where rollovers were for more than one financial year. And as you know, it cannot be approved the second time around. That was for the CASP grant, the Ilima Let's Seme project, and the ECD grant. Then in terms of the as we said earlier, the rollovers request, they could not be funded, and mainly because of Department of Education's overspending of 398 million rand. So even though many departments did not overspend, they had that money, we could not provide that rollover to them. Vote 2, the Provincial Legislature automatically receives their unspent funds of 85 million rand from last year, as well as their own revenue they collected of 5.7, and the statutory allocation of 5.1 million to the MPLs. In terms of provincial commitments, Department of Health receives 5.8 million. This was to correct the error in terms of the conditional grants. They were initially given an amount of 5.8 and then a further allocation of 22. We had assumed that that was 2 separate amounts, but in fact it was one amount, and therefore we had to correct that by providing an additional allocation of 5.8. Then 1.36 million was added to the funds allocated for the carry-through. So just to remind the members that we had initially an amount of 2.8 billion rand for the carry-through costs. But because of the budget cuts, we didn't want to cut the department's budgets at the beginning of last year. So we allocated an amount of 219 million rand to accommodate those budget cuts. We also wanted to see what the position would be at this time of the year in terms of the allocation then of those carry-through costs. As a result, we then had 2.6 billion rand that was then kept in reserve for us to make this allocation. We were able to top that up by 136 million through the remaining amount that was left, and this means that 2.7 was available for the carry-through costs. So we were able to top that up by 136 million. Table on the next slide. That this was the real cost that was calculated by the departments was 3 billion. We only had the 2.7 billion. So again, you'll see there's a shortfall in the carry-through costs that departments will have to absorb. The suspension of funds, there are 2. This is where there's a voluntary surrender of funds. Transport, 10 10 million rand to Etia for the upgrade of Mkuzi Airport. This is a project that they're working in collaboration. Treasury, 14.6 million, and there are three projects there that were indicated in the document. Slide 18 then gives a summary in terms of the table with the main appropriation per department. The rollovers in respect of the conditional grants, the unforeseeable, unavoidable, which is the donations we received, and then other adjustments would be then all the other additional amounts that we received, as well as any environments that were put forward. Then in terms of the funds, in terms of flood disaster, our total request was 5.3 billion. This is at a provincial level. It does not include the municipalities. Departments obviously had to reprioritize immediately. At that time, we also received funding from the donors. Then in terms of National Treasury, if we add National Treasury's amount, reprioritized and donor funding, that amounts to 4 billion rand. National Treasury has indicated over the MTF they will be giving additional funding for the disaster, and departments have also continued to reprioritize to ensure we deal with the damages that were caused. National Treasury allocated 1 billion rand towards the flood disaster, and the province reprioritized 3 billion, and we received donations of 10 million reprioritized and donor funding that amounts to 4 billion rand. In terms of the reprioritization, National Treasury has indicated over the MTF they will be giving additional funding for the disaster, and departments have also continued to reprioritize to ensure we deal with the damages that were caused. In terms of the 10 million rand allocated 1 billion rand towards the flood disaster, and the province reprioritized 3 billion, and we received donations of 10 million reprioritized and donor funding that amounts to 4 billion rand. In terms of the reprioritization, million was condition, human settlements 2.2 and social development 2.2. Chair, in terms of environments, then as you know, there are certain environments that have to be approved by the House. And towards the flood disaster, different funds that probably prioritised 3 billion, and we received donations of 10 million prioritised and donor funding that amounts to 4 billion rand. In terms of the reprioritization divisions, which exceed the 8%. In the book, it is highlighted in grey shading. And Chair, I'm not sure how much detail you want me to go to in this, but we do go into a lot of detail in this document, indicating for each department where they do require the legislature's approval, what those environments were, where it arose, where it was then allocated to, what the implications are for those specific projects. So Chair, I'm not sure if you want me to go through every department and go through each of those environments. Okay. All right, so great. Office of the Premier had no environments, Provincial Legislature no environments, Agriculture, Rural Development reduced their capital of 20 million rand, and also a decrease in various transfers. They indicate their Program 1 and Program 2, what those were in the main. Program 2, they also made changes to the cabinet and transfer budgets. In terms of Etia, here there was a reduction to Dubai Trade Port for 2 million rand because there's some slower than expected progress in the automotive supplier park. Then also there's 63.5 million the goods and services. What Etia has done is established a business support fund that Trade and Investment will be implementing to assist small businesses that were affected by the floods. Then you'll see other savings in terms of compensation that's been reallocated to the Film Commission, Youth and Film, business regulations, tourism. In some instances, because there weren't approvals of rollovers, they've had to use that funding to assist them with the underfunded. They've also enforced a number of cost-cutting measures so that they can try and find additional funding for their spending pressures. The page is another 99 million rand that was moved from goods and services, again, to provide for property payments. In terms of then Provincial Treasury, minor decrease in capital, and a lot of the funding in the environments have been done to provide for an EPWP job creation program that had not been budgeted for, but there had been a Cabinet Lekgotla resolution in that regard. It's also an increase then in terms of Program 2, where this project will be implemented. And then again, we had savings under compensation of employees, which assisted us in dealing with some of those spending pressures. Health, net reduction of 353 in terms of capital assets. And again, here they've spoken about there's obviously been a bit of slow uptake in terms of some of the construction projects. And so they've reallocated that to electricity, cleaning, security and gardening services, in terms of some of those pressures that they are facing. 160 million was identified under machinery and equipment, some of the medical equipment expenditure under the revitalisation grant. They've obviously also redirected again the funding to the medical supplies. Then, Chair, there's quite a few that talk to the Department of Health. That's also slide 41. Then human settlement, reduced by problems. And they made a database, and they're wanting to ensure an alignment of their database in that regard. They also obviously needed to reallocate funding to some of the spending pressures that they had, and you can see that in the allocations that they've made in that respect. Chair, the human settlement goes on until page 45. Community safety and liaison had no environments that needed the approval of the House. Sports, arts and culture had a decrease, and this decrease again was specifically for non-profit institutions. Here you can see they increased the transfer to COSAFO and the Comrades Marathon, and they reduced other transfers to other entities that apparently did not comply to the transfer policy. You'll see there that's the allocation they made. There also movements from the transfers and sports facilities and the library service grant. They reduced that and reallocated that to Mvoti and to Mfolozi and to the Big Five Hlabisa municipality. There's also been various increases and decreases that have been made based on the municipalities under funding, which required more than what the department undertook when they did their assessment. COCTA had an increase in development and planning. And I think really that here there was just reprioritization. They also had to find funding for the April flood disaster, including the hiring of water tankers for the different municipalities. And again, they talk about the environments in that regard. Some changes from to some of the allocations to some of the municipalities around water intervention and electrical support. COCTA continues for the next 52, 53, 54, 55. Again, you'll see the allocations and the shift from certain municipalities, taking away from some and reallocating to others, obviously depending on the progress that they've made, how far they are in the procurement process. If there are delays, they're obviously reallocating that funding. Transport had a reduction of 98 around buildings. And again, this is where some of the projects were delayed due to audit findings. And also there obviously was a massive reprioritization within the Department of Transport to deal with the issue around disaster. 27 million rand, again, this is the one I've spoken about, the challenges in that. 248 was against buildings. This is the issue around the AG. And then they've obviously reallocated that money to some of the spending pressures that they had as a department. Social development, a decrease of 2 million, transfers and subsidies, and also a reduction in machinery. And that was obviously used then to reallocate to reimburse officials for the use of vehicles. Again, social development continues in 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67. Here again, they're also looking at realigning their master list from the various NPOs. Public Works, repurposing of 11 million rand due to lower than anticipated spending on these projects. And obviously they have to, any funding that they can find, they use to allocate towards property payments. As we know, they've got a challenge with the underfunding in that regard. Gifts and donations, Chair, as the last slide, this is anyone that gives a donation of more than 100,000 has to get the House's approval. There were 4 that were made. Etia made 200,000 rand deposit donation to Get to Natural. This was to support an SMME to attend to cover the launch and marketing costs of a company. Then there was Dube Tradeport that gave 101,000 rand. Sharks Board, 300,000 rand for a symposium, and tourism that sponsored the International Medicana Business Conference. Thank you, Chair. Do you want me to stop there, or should we continue with the next presentation? Should we continue with the next presentation, or should we pause here?
No, for this, I wanted to check if they've got questions on this one, because it is going to be debated as well tomorrow. Honorable members, on the appropriations bill, anything that you want to check? Honorable Governor, you will follow Honorable Rogers. I see these two hands. Please shout in case I don't see you. Honorable Rogers.
Thanks, Chair. Carol, maybe just two bits of clarity. I'm battling to focus with this jet lag. The Annexure 1 on the MEC's presentation today, we end up in a net financial position of 213, a negative 213. And then we still have a contingency reserve of 350 million. Am I then correct in saying the difference between the two is our net cash balance in the province? That was the one question, Chair. The other one was on the just over the 1 billion rand that's been allocated to flood relief. Now there was this big hullabaloo about the president having made promises and we never got it. Is this part of that allocation? And if so, have we already spent parts of it through reprioritization, or is it available for expenditure now? Thanks, Chair.
Honorable Governor, you are shouting, my lady.
Yes, Chair. Chair, I just wanted to speak about these donations or gifts by ETIA. And I understand there seem to be 3. Can I just get a breakdown of them again?
Okay. Accounting office and your team, if you can respond to these two speakers.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I'll respond, and then if my team wants to add. In terms of the first question, if we look at that table, so we ended the net financial position at a deficit of 213 million rand. But because we had a contingency reserve, we then had an amount of 136 million rand left over. That was then carried through costs of the wage amount. As I mentioned earlier, at the beginning of the year, we had that amount kept aside, which we wanted to allocate, and we had taken from that about just the departments. So we took the balance of that cash, the 136, and we've allocated to top up that amount. So that there is no money remaining for this financial year for any further allocation. Then in terms of the 1 billion rand, so in terms of the various funds that are available for disaster at a national level, we as a province received 350. The allocation to human settlement was from that immediate 1 billion, but there were also quite a significant number of allocations to municipalities out of that 1 billion. If I remember correctly, I think it's about 750, 800 million rand in total that the province got from that from the one famous 1 billion, which was for immediate relief. And then obviously there have been many other subsequent allocations made from national. These obviously, the DORA was only sent to yesterday, and so there will be a process then for departments to start spending against those amounts. And then just for that's online. It was the Department of 2 costs of hair products produced by a KZN woman-owned startup funded by ETIA Technology Transfer Fund. Then there was Dube Tradeport that sponsored a package and tickets to the manufacturing in Indaba, and they indicate who they supported there, and that was for 101,000. KZN Sharksport was 300,000 on the 15th, and this was for the South African Marine Symposium that was arranged by UKZN. Tourism KZN sponsored International Medicana Business Conference, which was 118,000 rand. Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if my team want to add.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson. Good afternoon to yourself and good afternoon to all the members. I think on the flood relief, Honourable Rogers, Human Settlements is the only one that has started spending on the 325 because they received the funds quite earlier on. Transport, on the other hand, we have not seen the expenditure of this new allocation, but they had reprioritized from their provincial road maintenance grant to start spending. So we will monitor as to whether transport will be able to actually spend this money before the end of the financial year. And I think that social development also had used their own funds to assist the victims that were in the shelters. So some of the expenditure was then creating pressure on other items. So this expenditure then, partly you might say that some of it has already been used because they've used their own other funds, but it's not all of it that has been used to date. Thanks.
Any follow-up, honorable members? And you must remember your engagement with the National Treasury on the 17th in that icy part of the world. Anything that you want to pose? I thought we were going to pose this one, honorable members. According to the National Treasury, the Department of Human Settlement is supposed to have got the second tranche. But it seems as if the spending, generally speaking, in the province is very low. That's why then National Treasury raised that particular issue. We wanted to find out on your side, how is spending of the monies, because they can't release when the percentage is very low. They spoke about 80% of the spending so that they release the next tranche, but ourselves as the province were mentioned to be at 65%. That's why then they couldn't release part of the money. Just wanted to find out on that one.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. The issue with human settlement is that they progressed really well initially up front in terms of the TRUs, where I think they've delivered more than 1,000 TRUs. Then there were challenges with some of the parcels of land that they'd identified where community members weren't happy about these areas now being used for TRUs. There were approvals that needed to be received. And then there was a change in terms of the approach to say, could we not rather consider putting the victims in temporary residential units? So I think it was about mid-September, National agreed then out of that 325 million rand that was allocated, I think it's just over 100 million rand would be used then for temporary residential accommodation. So that was only approved in the latter part of September. So the HDA has started a procurement process in order to identify suitable buildings for this purpose. And I think that would be probably why there's been a slow spend. But I'm not sure if the team have got the numbers, but I stand to be corrected. But I think that you're correct that they've only spent about 100 million rand of that 325 because of that reason.
Chair. Chairperson.
Yes, Honorable Governor, I'm not having my gadget with me. That's why I can't see you. I rely on other people to assist me if you don't shout. Yes, okay. Honorable Member.
No, thanks. Chair, I'm just wanting to get some clarity here. Honorable Rogers raised the issue of how much of cash is in the province for further allocation. And we're told that there's nothing for the rest of the financial year. So what happens if we have a problem?
Yes, Honorable Member, and it's summer, and you cannot predict the disasters once more. Yes, Tanya, I can see you are ready to respond.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good afternoon to everybody. So, yes, we probably haven't been in this situation before. In the adjustments budget, we hand out all the money we have. I think last year we were left with 100 million. This is probably a unique circumstance, partly brought on by the fact that education overspent last year. And so our flexibility to use the contingency reserve for other things was used up. And that's what we tried to explain in the presentation, to say we had 395 million, but it went mainly to fund the conditional grant rollovers and the legislature's commitments, where we have no choice but to fund it because FAMPLA says we must. So if something happens between now and the end of the financial year, obviously if it's a disaster, then we would go knocking on National Treasury's door. But if it is something that we see that crops up in the province, Section 31 of the PFMA allows us to write to the Minister of Finance to ask for second adjustments to be had. But then the only place would be to look at departments who are showing poor spending. And you'll see in the mid-year report, there are some that are not spending in line with that 50% benchmark you would expect by mid-year. So there are those options. But for this adjustments budget, we were limited to the 395. So it's the 350 contingency reserve and 45 million that was left over from last year's net positive financial position.
I assume that you have been covered, will be ready to debate tomorrow. And then I think you also looked at the environments. There are two types of them. There are those that are supposed to be approved by the accounting officers, and then the Treasury brought each and every one that exceeds the 8%. I think you understood that part. They are tabulated one by one, department by department. Yeah, so I think we are covered in terms of this one. Can we move on with the midterm?
Chair, sorry, can I, apologies, can I get some clarity? So,
okay, no problem.
So the environments that have to be approved will be approved tomorrow. Am I understanding that correctly? Now, I've been here now 7 or 8 years. I've never been in a position where I'm handed environments for approval and 24 hours later we have to approve them. Why have we found ourselves in this situation? It almost seems like a tick box exercise, and it almost seems like we're being forced into something that we haven't yet actually analyzed. Why is that?
It has happened in the past. I remember vividly. It happened even in the adjustments of last year. And then we're up there. I can't remember in which room. Tanya was taking us through each and every item and all the stuff. But can you clarify my own leader there?
Chair, I don't think it's different to other years. We probably in the last 5 years started to do an explanatory memorandum that picks out the environments so that they're easier for members to track. Whereas in the past, it just used to be in the book and we'd basically have to rely on each member reading the whole book from beginning to end. You then asked us to make it easier for members to track, and so we highlighted it in grey and we picked it out and we put it into an explanatory memorandum so that you don't have to try and see which ones the Treasury can approve and which ones you can approve. So I can't offhand remember if in the past we've tabled and then we've debated the next day, but I think it's just, I guess, because of how the process worked this year. Maybe the sitting program, which we don't really have any responsibility with, was just like that. But we haven't done it differently to any other year. But perhaps the difference is that this year the tabling and the debate are that close to one another, where normally I think there are a few days between the two.
Committee so that we get briefed, and we went up. I can't remember whether it was Ngute or this other one where it did the same, and that's why we're contesting the city, and we did not win. You know, if you fight and then you don't win, you know, you don't keep on fighting because you were in the fair negotiations and we did not succeed. While we were still outside the country, we were negotiating for the postponement, and the HOD knows we also demanded that they consider giving us the date so that we are briefed on the midterm, because by then we had thought that we might do the hearings with the department electronically. That's what we thought we could do, but it will depend on the picture and all the stuff. So those are the things. I think my leader, you are explained. Yeah, you are explained. Colleagues, can we get someone who is going to take us through the midterm? And the midterm, I'm just trying to picture it. How are we going to deal with this thing in the debate and whatever? But we'll have to deal with it. That's why this document was very, very important to us. And we'll apply our minds and find out which are the things that in the debate we are going to highlight. Because our own aim of having the hearings is because we want to see the red lights and then engage with the department. And it has assisted us a lot in the past. I remember one government department was projected to overspend by a huge amount. But through the engagement and then demanding the turnaround plans and all the stuff, and then the department was able to remain within budget. So that's why, to me, it's very, very important to engage the departments. So HOD and the team, we're handing over to you.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair, Honorable Members, Honorable MEC, as well as my colleagues. I will take you through the departmental spending as at the end of mid-year. Honorable Chair, you will guide me in terms of the because I'm also conflicted. I do realize that the mid-year process has kind of like overtaken us by the adjustments budget, but also you're having a debate tomorrow. So I will skip some things, but where I am going very fast, you will stop me. In terms of our presentation, we'll just look at revenue expenditure, including conditional grants, infrastructure, as well as the cash position of the provinces at the end of September. On slide 3, it's a table that shows the provincial owned revenue. So what we do is we compare spending of departments as at the end of mid-year, but also compare that spending to the annual budget. So towards the end, you will see this is a percentage collected in the table that is comparing your receipt or even expenditure versus your main budget. So that should ideally always be 50%, whilst the third column is looking at spending against your projections at mid-year, and so that should be more like 100%. So you will find that when I'm trying to explain, I'm talking about close to 100%, but in other instances, I'm talking about the straight line benchmark of 50%. So in terms of our collections, we had collected 1.3 billion at mid-year versus a budgeted projection of 1.87 billion. So that was 98%. So slightly close to projections. But when you compare that to the annual budget, it was 48.7%. And so even they were not far off. And so in aggregate, we do see that in terms of projections now of revenue, you will see that most departments are projecting to be over collected, whilst 2 are projecting to under collect, and the 2 would be health, and that is significant as well, because when you look at their collection at mid-year, it was only 75.6%, and there's a slight or a minor projected under collection by social development. And the largest projected over collection is displayed by transport at 143 million, followed by ATIA at 26 million, as well as education at 20.5 million. In slide 5, we then give reasons of this projected over collection, where transport provided a reason stating that the projected over collection would be under motor vehicle licenses, and this is because 36.4 million was for agency fees and it's going to be reimbursed to the agency registering authority, and the department projecting that they will pay about 80 million for that. But also this overcollection will depend on the successful vehicle auction that is expected in the 4th quarter. ATIA attributes its projected overcollection against horse racing taxes, and we do note that the industry seems to be recovering from COVID, and so there's been, especially the horse racing has been doing well, but also we note that there's a licensee that transferred to the province transferring its online betting platform, and education is projecting to over because of recovery of staff debts, but also it should be noted that in their revenue they also include write-off of previous uncollectible debts. Treasury is projecting to overcollect by 4.5 million, mainly against interest that is earned on the provincial bank account, and as I've mentioned, that health is projecting to be their main issue is really against the road accident funds, which has been struggling to pay them, and we know this has been going on for a while now. On slide 6 is the expenditure. So the province would have spent 69.471 billion against projected 71.181 billion at Midyear, which translates to 97.6%. And if we compare that spending to the main budget, it was 49.3%. So it's really close to the 50%. But already you can see that it was projected to be overspent by 2.9 billion. And the majority of the 2.9 billion members would be attributed to the wage, the payment of the wage increases, and that excludes the 3% which was recently announced. And as you would have heard today, there was money allocated towards the expenditure for the wage. But nevertheless, I'm just going to go through highlighting departments that would have concerns. On page 7, there's additional allocation that is for human settlements, which has been mentioned already for the floods. WAS Transport would have moved 10 million to Etia for the Mkuze Airport, and there was mentioned the adjustments. And on slide 8, we had those rollovers that were approved. I think I just need to note that the ECD one will be transferred to education. Other than that, the detail is the same as in the adjustments budget. And what was not included in the at mid-year, we would have heard already from National Treasury, but was not included in these tables, is the additional carry-through costs of the 2021 wage agreement. So mainly the non-pensionable cash allowance, as well as the allocation for the 3% salary increases. And so all of that would have been in the adjustments now. And I think that, as I've mentioned, would reduce the projected overspending that is already at mid-year was projected by departments. On slide 10, we then go through each department showing how they would have spent and the reasons for their underspending. As I said earlier, when we look at spending, we look at it against projections at mid-year and also partly against the annual budget. So Office of the Premier was really quite low at 78.5%, and the underspending is attributed to COE, due to slow recruitment processes, but also against goods and services. And there's just a list of things where they would have said that there was underspending. It's just mainly contractors and travel subsistence. They were affected by the floods where the department did less traveling. Legislature was slightly overspent at 103.2%, and is mainly against goods and services. This is in respect of contractors' costs, and also there were issues against our pressure against advertising costs, venues, and facilities. The Department of Agriculture and Rural Development was at 89.9%. And they had slight underspending against compensation of employees due to slow processes of filling posts, but also they were showing that there was pressure with regards to the non-pensionable allowance. There were pressures in goods and services, mainly against the veterinary services. We will remember that the department is dealing with the FMD response, which was not budgeted. So they've been moving some of their savings to these pressures. And there was also underspending against various other items such as transfers as well as buildings and machinery. And against buildings, they were noting that there was slow progress by Public Works for the rehabilitation of staff accommodation as well as research farms in Dundee, Kokstad, and Butler. Etia spending at mid-year was 78.7%. Again, slightly underspent, well, not slight, but underspent against goods and services, against various projects. They would have mentioned Operation Vula Fund and the Youth Skills Development Mentorship Program, the pulp and water manufacturing initiatives, and they also had underspending against their departmental agencies and accounts due to lower transfers against these entities. Education was at 99%. which is like a percentage lower than 100%. They having pressures on their compensation of employees, and we've been reporting to the House the challenges that education has, and so those again are just repeated with regards to budget cuts that have affected their compensation of employees, especially posts that are currently occupied. And they would have had also pressures as a result of the 2021 wage agreement, and we have allocated money in the adjustments budget. There were some savings which would have resulted to the 1% under against buildings, as well as training and development, and some items on goods and services. But I think those are just enforced savings so that they can be able to meet their pressures in their budget. Treasury was underspent at 82.7%, and it is mainly against compensation of employees due to various issues, but overall will be delays in filling posts, goods and services as well, in respect of various operational costs, such as the CITA security cost, as well as support services that is provided to department and municipalities. And we noted that in the adjustments budget, Treasury would have suspended some of their savings to next year. Health spending was at 97.2%, and they also have slight underspending against buildings, machinery, as well as COE. Buildings, it will be attributed to poor performance by contractors on some of the projects, such as the termination of the No-Dale Hospital project, while the Konjeni Hospital project was delayed due to the contractor facing cash flow challenges. And in addition, the payments for the Pixley Kaseme were not made due to some issue in the clause, but also there was low spending on the April 22 flood-related projects, and these were impacted by appeals that were made by service providers, and those appeals were taken to the bid appeals tribunal that were resulted to the slow spending. On slide 18, we note that human settlements spending of 78.5% was low, attributed to the transfers that were not made for some projects that were affected by the April floods disaster. Community safety as well was at 89.3%. The underspending is mainly against compensation of employees as well as goods and services. The reasons are also provided there. And then sports and arts and culture was at 85.4%. Also, compensation of employees is one of the reasons for underspending, but also they had underspending against provinces and municipalities where some transfers were not made because of various issues. There's MOUs and also just various things that were provided there. COGTA had overspending at 102% against media projections because they made some transfers to various municipalities earlier than planned, and that is for various projects that are mentioned there. And they were also having some underspending against compensation of employees, so that would have mitigated their overspending at media. Transport was at 101.6% as well against media projections again. So against media, they were doing well, but if you look at the annual report, against annual budget, then they're quite low. So the overspending was mainly against transfers that they would have made to public corporations in respect of the PTOG grant for bus subsidies. So this was in relation to the increase in claims because of increases in fuel prices. There's some various pressures from goods and services as well that are mentioned there in the detail on slide 21. Social development also had 103.4%. So they've got pressures as well from compensation of employees because of the budget cuts, but also goods and services because they had to pay prior accruals. And it is mainly against property payments relating to security services as well as fleet services costs. And again, the detail is provided there on slide 22. On slide 23, we mentioned that public works spending was at 138%, and they attribute this pressure to increases in the property rates, and that is causing them to be really under pressure. And generally, at adjustments budget, we normally allocate funding to public works, and it has been mentioned already, there hasn't been money this adjustments budget to do so. In terms of the projected year-end position, the departments would have projected to spend 143.721 billion against 140 billion, showing the projected over expenditure of 2.9 billion. And I've mentioned that it is really attributed to the carry-through cost of the 2021. So with the allocations made today, so that projected overspending will slightly be lower. We do expect that, though, that some departments will still be showing pressure due to various reasons. And these amounts that have been allocated will be included in the November IYM. I think maybe I can just highlight that in terms of projections, as I would have said, that there's some departments that are leading in terms of material projected overspending. I want to highlight health, which is projecting at Midyear to be overspent by 1.6 billion. This is mainly against the non-pensionable allowance that I've mentioned, but they also have accruals from 21-22. They're also having pressure for having retained COVID staff that were on contract, and they would have also under budgeted for medical interns because the allocation that was received from National was insufficient for existing interns. And these pressures to some degree were mitigated by delays in filling some of the posts. Education's pressure of 759 million were mainly against compensation of employees, and this is because of the budget cuts that we would have mentioned, but also the carry through of the 2021 wage agreement. The public works having the third largest projected overspending of 342 million attributes this to the municipal property rates, as I've mentioned. Social development is also having 87 million. This is largely in respect of compensation of employees because they've had budget cuts, as well as goods and services because of the pressure on security services, and some pressure related to buildings because of the ECD. They were finishing and making some payments towards some ECD creches that were being constructed. The department has been notified, though, that they would be receiving additional funding, so that would help in mitigating some of these pressures. DAD also was projecting to be overspent by 36 million, but that was largely against compensation of employees because of the wage agreement, and they've been given money for that. Airtia would have projected to be over by 16 million. Again, they've got rollovers that they would have asked for, which were not approved because there were no funds. But in terms of their spending at Midyear, they should be able to fund those pressures. Human settlements was projecting to be over by 9.9 million. This is in respect of the wage agreement. Again, they've been allocated money. So mitigating those projected over was Treasury, who was projecting to be under by 1.7 million. So that was expenditure. On slide 30 is conditional grants. And with conditional grants overall, departments against projections at Midyear, they were 92%, whilst against annual budget, they were 17.6%. I think we have details again from slide 33 on the grants that we had low spending. I could just mention that we are mentioning those such as CAS, ILIMA, and those, I think we must note that only the planting season will start on the third and fourth quarter. So we expect some improvement, although we still are concerned because in the past, those grants have always been underspent, except for this past financial year where they didn't lose a significant amount of money. Learners with profound intellectual disability was also having low spending as well. So they also mentioned the reasons. The health facility revitalization grant was also low, and the reasons are provided by the department. Coming to human settlements, I think it also comes to the point that was raised by Honorable Chair, where they're having low spending on human settlements development grant. If you look at their spending against annual budget, it was only 35.2%. That is low. But also the informal settlements upgrading partnership grant, and the HOD did try to explain there earlier, but we note that they have spent 22.6% against the annual budget, and there's various programs or projects, housing projects that were delayed. The PRMG, which is under transport, was also having low spending, and we've mentioned the reasons that the departments have provided. There was also some slow spending against EPWP, against ETIA, as well as the social sector EPWP education. The one against ETIA, at least the department normally supplements that grant with equitable share. So we do think that it is reasonable that they are projecting to be fully spent at year end, although their spending currently was only 16.4% against annual budget. So that was expenditure. I think, that was conditional grants. I think we note that there's some grants that are showing low levels of spending, and that is something that we're going to be paying attention to as Treasury, as the province doesn't like to underspend and also to lose money to national. In terms of infrastructure, at Midyear, our departments would have spent 95.2% against their Midyear projections, and against the annual budget, it was 39.2%. So there was some slight underspending by some departments, whilst few others were showing healthy spending. And even in some instances, other departments are showing projected overspending against infrastructure. If you go to slide 42, we note that health was projecting to be underspent by 131 million, and this was against new infrastructure assets capital due to delays in the finalization of our approvals to proceed with the payment for the Pixley Kaseme Hospital. And as I've mentioned, this was not done. And then the funds were reprioritized within health facility revitalization grant in the adjustments. And in terms of COGTA, they were projected to be under by 61.4 million. And this is in respect of new infrastructure assets related to CSCs, and those are mentioned. And in the department is projecting to have underspending of 51 million, which relates to the funds reprioritized from the borehole program and the construction of district offices in Iklopo to goods and services for the water intervention program and the electrification program. Works was projecting to be overspent against 30 million, and it is against maintenance, upgrades, and refurb. They have various pressures in their infrastructure projects that are mentioned there. And I think if we note as well in the adjustments budget, they would have moved some funds to address those pressures. The social development is projected to overspend by 17 million, and they have pressures in respect of work that was done for some places of safety as well as services officers. But they're going to review their projections, and this was done in the adjustments budget. And the refurbishment and rehabilitation of capital spending was high as a result of payment of certified invoices for completed work relating to various projects such as the PATA COICC. Again, the department is projecting to be over by 4.8, but they will review those projections. Legislature was projecting to be overspent by 3.7 against their maintenance and repair for lifts, maintenance, day-to-day maintenance, and the painting of the legislature building. And by Midyear, expenditure of 5.6 was incurred in respect of the maintenance and repair due to the payment of invoices from Public Works related to the main chamber roof repairs, which is ongoing from previous financial year. The projected year-end overspending will be funded from the unspent surplus operational funds and revenue over collected, which will be allocated, and it was allocated today when the adjustments budget was tabled. The Department of Sports, Arts and Culture was projected to be over by 3.6 million, and this is related to unplanned maintenance due to the infrastructure that was destroyed by the April 2022 floods that is mentioned there. I'm sure they would be able to find some savings and reprioritize for that pressure. And the last slide is showing the cash position, honorable members. we note that the net monthly bank balance of the province remains positive, and the positive net cash paying position of the province is showing a downward trend, though, on a weekly basis, mainly due to incurring costs relating to the 2021 wage agreement, while the cash for this will only be received after the national adjustment estimate has been appropriated, and it is expected, though, that the province will remain cash positive in 22-23. That brings me to the end of our briefing on the mid-year budget performance for departments. Thank you very much.
Honorable members, can we request the tabling of the presentation of the entities so that we take the discussion once? No, they have agreed.
Good afternoon, Honourable MEC, Honourable Chair and other members, colleagues. I'll run at the same speed as Nomti through my presentation. We'll look at the revenue collected, the expenditure, then the infrastructure spending and rationalisation of public entity process. Just on the first slide there, I'm going to just highlight bottom corner, the total of percentage collected by the public entities is 60.5 by mid-year. If we go to the next slide, looking at the composition of the revenue collected by mid-year, departmental transfers come to 1.254 billion, the rollovers from the prior year comes to 1.085 billion, and own revenue collected is 290.653 million by mid-year. In terms of the projected year-end revenue collection, the entities project to be close to target with an over collection of 10.908 million. That's largely against Richards Bay IDZ, and I'll speak to that a bit later. In terms of the major revenue collection by the entities, is Imvelo being one that collects own revenue. They received 52.2 of their adjusted budget by mid-year. 116.198 million was from their own sources of revenue, largely from tourism income, from accommodation and admission fees, as well as project implementation fees and donations. They're projecting to overcollect by 4 million by year end, and that's largely ascribed to tourism income from accommodation, which showed significant improvement after COVID. However, saying that it is still below pre-COVID levels. It is noted that the commercialization strategy has not yet been implemented, and we therefore can't see any revenue improvement. And the end of year overcollection includes the skills development levy refunds and insurance, which were under budgeted for. The next collection would be Dubai Trade Port. They received 61.6 of their adjusted budget of 1.024. They collected 74 million in own revenue, and that's largely from property rentals and interest earned from funds held by the entity. They're projecting to collect in line with the adjusted budget. Gaming and betting, they received 50.3%. They collected 19.8 from their own revenue sources, and that's largely relating to license renewal fees and CAPCITA refunds for staff training. They're projecting to undercollect by 5 million by year end, and that's due to the budget providing for an application fee adjustment, and that was not implemented due to the struggling businesses after COVID-19 and also the July 2021 unrest, whereas the budget had included this. The KwaZulu-Natal Growth Fund Trust, they received 69.6 of the adjusted budget. They collected 30 million of own revenue, and that's largely from interest from project loans and on positive cash balances in their bank account. They're projecting to collect in line with adjusted budget. Then Sharks Board, they received 56.481 million against the adjusted budget. They collected 15 million in own revenue, and that's largely from meshing fees and hiring out of venues. They project to collect in line with the adjusted budget. Richards Bay IDZ, they received 80.2% of the adjusted budget. They collected 24 in own revenue, and that's largely from property rental fees and land leases, as well as interest earned on short-term call accounts in respect of funds received from ETIA. The overcollection of 9 million by year end is largely ascribed to the property rentals and land leases and interest earned, and that was under budgeted for. If we look at the summary of expenditure by mid-year, if you just glance over the percentage spent of all the entities there, you'll see none of them are above 50%. The total there, the average being 37%. Composition of expenditure by mid-year, compensation of employees, you'll see that comprises 44% of the budget, goods and services being 38.6%, and then capital assets make up 13.7% of the total budget of 1.5 billion. Projected year-end expenditure, you'll see of the adjusted budget, they're projecting to underspend by 2.53 million. As Treasury, we believe that may be a little higher, and that's how the projections are unrealistic. In terms of actual spend, if we skip a slide and go to slide 14, the Zulu Royal Household Trust, there's slow spending there, and that's because of vacancies, and no funds were spent in respect of the revenue generation strategy, whereas 3.4 million was set aside for that. The spending is projected to be incurred in the third and fourth quarter, as the Zulu Royal House Trust had appointed a business development consultant to implement its business development and fundraising strategy. The Zulu Royal Household Trust projects to spend in line with the adjusted budget, and Treasury deems this realistic. ADA, slow spending by mid-year at 44.8%, and that's largely because of vacancies and infrastructure projects. There's some examples of the projects that are slow there, and it's anticipated to be completed in the third quarter with production inputs to be procured in the last quarter of the financial year. ADA projects to spend in line with the adjusted budget, but we consider this being unrealistic, considering this percentage of spending by year end, and the procurement will only start in the third and fourth quarters. Ezimvelo, by mid-year, spent 44.1% of the adjusted budget. Slow spending was largely because of vacancies. The Premier had granted approval to 405 critical vacancies, but these posts are taking longer to fill than what was anticipated. The following projects showed low spending by mid-year, and that's the road maintenance projects at Midmar, Umlalazi, and Itala. There's an appeals process at Midmar, and that's still ongoing. The IT WAN project was only awarded in July. The alien invasive species project started late. The funding agreement was only signed end of September. And then the gas infrastructure upgrades could only continue in August after approval was received from Provincial Treasury, because this related to retained unspent funds from the prior year. Capital projects, which was slow, only showing 17% spending, and those were the Ngudini project that was put on hold because of a budget shortfall. There's a Mpila camp staff accommodation where the EIA was still outstanding. Work had subsequently been completed and construction has now started. The National Department of Tourism roofing project, and contractor challenges delayed that project. And then the NDT Midmar revamp project was also delayed because they had to await approval from NDT on the scope of work to be completed. Machine and equipment was also ordered late because of the PPPFA and regulations moratorium on advertising of new tenders. East Street Route Legacy project to date, the entity was waiting approval from the plans from the Umfla-Boya-Lingana municipality that had subsequently been given, and the project is now underway. Ezimvelo projects to overspend by 215,000 against the adjusted budget. It's considered to be optimistic because of slow spending to date. The Tradeport only spent 35.4% of their budget, and that was largely because of procurement delays, IT hardware, chiller coils for greenhouses, greenhouse screens, etc., all ordered late. The entity also has various vacancies, and the low cost for operating the tissue culture laboratory and Dubai iConnect was low because of fewer orders from clients. The project spend in line with adjusted budget. However, this is unrealistic considering that numerous projects such as warehouse management system, the road rehabilitation project, and fencing, etc., were still at procurement stage, and this is specialized procurement that will take some time. The Sharks Board spent 41% of their adjusted budget, also a large number of vacancies there, and research into the shark repellent cable was still in progress by mid-year. They project to spend in line with the adjusted budget by year end, but again, this is not considered realistic considering the capacity constraints. TIC spent only 38.4%. Slow spending was due to vacancies, and programs such as international investment conferences and export promotion initiatives were scheduled to happen in the third and fourth quarters. There are challenges with regard to technical assistance fund due to the non-submission of documents from the qualifying applicants, and the aquaculture development zone projects, the clothing and textile SEZ, and also the Drakensberg cable car study and leather processing hub environmental impact assessment were slower than anticipated due to the specialized nature of these projects. They project to underspend by 14 million by year end. Tourism Authority, by mid-year, they only spent 45.6%, and that's because of vacancies. Also, NDT funded Mandela Capture Site Upgrade Project was not showing any progress for the last 2 years. There were multiple tender delays. And then the Insikeni and May Lodges upgrade projects were delayed as the funding agreement with ETIA was only signed at the end of August. The KwaZulu Caves Precinct project was delayed because of SEM processes, largely because ETIA changed the scope of the projects after the first tender was advertised, so that had to go back to the drawing board. Although tourism projects to spend in line with the adjusted budget, Provincial Treasury considers this to be optimistic. Richards Bay Industrial spent only 19.9% of their budget. Slow spending was largely because of ongoing construction of the top structures for Elegant Chemicals and ongoing infrastructure projects relating to electrical upgrades in Phase 1A. They project to underspend by 95 million by year end. The IDFC, by mid-year, the IDFC transferred 52.6 of their 119 million for this year to beneficiaries. However, this constitutes only 16% of the accumulated funds transferred to the entity across multiple years. Slow spending was because of 9 projects that showed no movement or limited spending on mid-year, and I list them there. The IDFC has a mid-year closing balance of 276 million. The entity is projecting to remain with a year-end balance of 147 million, and this is related to accrued funds from prior years. The Liquor Authority spent only 44%, and that's because of vacancies, and also some projects like the compliance inspections and the external social responsibility and awareness programs will only happen towards the end of the year as the new cycle for liquor license renewals started in October. And the Liquor Authority projects to spend fully against the adjusted budget, and we consider that this is optimistic. Form Commission by mid-year spent only 33.8%. And that's largely because of ongoing multi-year nature of farm production and development projects, as well as the Women and Youth Farm Production Program that was still in progress at mid-year. The KZN Farm Commission projects to spend in line with the adjusted budget by year end, but this is considered to be unrealistic. KZN Growth Fund spent 44.6% of its adjusted budget. Slow spending was largely because of vacant posts, and also certain expenses are only expected to be incurred in the second half of the year, and that relates to legal fees for drafting and signing of agreements. Expenses in relation to the due diligence studies and assets and equity valuations will also be incurred at the second half of the year. At mid-year, the growth fund projected to overspend by 8.9 million. However, the entity indicated that it's in the process of reviewing its projections and that it will remain within its budget. Moses Kotane Institute spent only 45% of its adjusted budget, and that was largely due to the ongoing rollout of the ICT hubs training, and the training was still ongoing. That training school was moved from Sharksport to MKI, but because of COVID, there had been a reduction in face-to-face capacity building and training programs. MKI projects to spend in line with the adjusted budget by year end, but we consider this to be optimistic. Gaming and betting spent 47% of its budget, largely due to vacancies, and then there was also associated lower travel and subsistence costs. They project to spend in line with the adjusted budget by year end, but this is considered unrealistic. Amafa spent only 36% of its adjusted budget. The slow spending was largely due to vacancies and associated costs, as well as heritage projects, which are scheduled to happen in the second half of the year. We don't consider the end of year projection to be in line with the adjusted budget to be realistic. In terms of infrastructure spending, only 4 entities with major values in infrastructure spending, and you'll see there's Zulu Royal House Trust there. The actual mid-year being low. Actually, all of those infrastructure spending projects are averaged at 24.7% of the adjusted budgets. The Zulu Royal House Trust planned their projects to happen in the 3rd quarter. Dubai Trade Port spent 34% of its infrastructure budget, largely due to delays in procurement for various construction projects, and that will be undertaken in the 2nd half of the year. That includes construction for the warehouses at Trade Zone 2, the road rehabilitation project, fencing for land holdings, and then also the maintenance costs were low because outstanding invoices were not received. Isabella spent only 14%. The projects there was largely slow because of environmental approvals outstanding, challenges with the contractors, and delays in signing of agreements and approvals. Richards Bay IDZ spent only 2.7% of its budget, largely due to electricity upgrades for phase 1A, and that's still in progress by mid-year. And then the construction of the top structures planned to commence in the last quarter of 22-23. Less maintenance was undertaken as only routine monthly maintenance was required. In terms of rationalization of public entity status, I'm going to skip the first 2 slides and I'm going to go with the key milestones. No, I'm going to skip 3 slides. So the slide that we're going to is slide 29. So by mid-year of 22-23, the major ongoing activities was that the entities with assistance of GTAC finalized the development of business cases for the first phase of the mergers. These business cases were submitted to Provincial Treasury on the 8th of November for analysis and onward submission to National Treasury. The business cases evaluate the reasons for the merger. It looks at optimal structures and service delivery models and map the process for the merger, transitional arrangements, etc. It is a prerequisite for the listing of entities in the PFMA schedules. The business case and the bill for the MKR, Moses Kotane Research Institute, was submitted to National Treasury for consideration and to list the entity as a Schedule 3C entity. The accounting authorities have started to prepare joint APPs and strategic plans for 23-24. The major implications on the entities at mid-year, as with the preceding period, was that the entities were not able to fill their vacant posts. And these posts are now, the vacancies are now creating capacity challenges and impacts on the entity's ability to deliver on their services, and that needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency. It's not only the rationalizing entities that are suffering, but in the ETIA camp, all of the entities are subjected to the same brush. The major areas of focus for the remainder of 23-24 is then to submit the joint APPs for the 23-24 year and then the 5-year strategic plans. The second draft MTM baseline for the merged entities was submitted to National Treasury in November. Although at this point there was no projected cost savings or additional costs associated with the mergers considered in the second draft databases, and that will only be done in the third draft database due in January. The entities will also need to finalize and align the budget for inclusion in the final APP for 23-24. They have prepared joint organizational structures at management level, only the high level organizations, and that will now have to be filtered through to all levels of the organization. The entities have started to set some funds aside from savings which were realized in 21-22, and that was towards minor rationalization expenses such as change management, workshops, board induction, etc. At this point, the costs are the amounts that are set aside are insignificant. Although rough estimates for the cost of the mergers have been determined, the majority of these costs are not provided for in the budget database because of competing priorities. Therefore, as and when savings will become available, these will need to be reprioritized towards merger costs, such as the integration of IT systems, equalization of conditions of service, etc. The major areas of focus for the remainder of the year will also be to then develop the joint organizational structures for all levels, to finalize the new program structures for the budget. And then the entity will also need to identify the capacity and skills gaps and prioritize the filling of funded vacant posts for the merged entities. And then the Joint Management Committee and ETIA will need to decide if and when it will redirect the savings that will emanate from this year to cover rationalization expenses. Some of the savings from 21-22 were rolled over and redirected within the entities toward areas of spending pressure, but obviously a lot of the funding, a lot of the spending pressures for rationalization have not been factored in. The mergers are still anticipated to be finalized by 1 April 2023. Thank you, Chair.
This thing of yours, of entities, they will give us sleepless nights again. We were told when we were engaging them that things were sorted out, they were sorting themselves out. But it seems as if there is none. Because the problem is around issues of underspending, specifically on COE. That's what is a problem. And then those vacant posts also lead to poor performance by the entities, And we're hearing nothing about the bills that ETIA once promised that they were coming to the legislature more than a year ago. Because that's one of the stumbling blocks as well. There are no pieces of legislation that allowed their existence, unless there's going to be a shortcut. I don't know. Honorable members, any questions and comments on both the entities as well as the government departments? Mhlegazi, I see your hand is up. Please check if Governor's hand is not up there, but I hope she's going to shout at me so that I am able to pay attention to her. Yes, Honorable Rogers.
Akatela land. You can't even open but I'll just sit here and ask the question. Thanks, Chair. Chair, on the mid-year budget performance report, and referring to the last slide, it says that it's expected that the province will remain cash positive 22-23. But if you look at the adjustments estimates today, if I'm understanding it correctly, we're on a zero balance. Am I missing something, or was the midterm the mid-year budget performance prepared before the adjustments? Because my question on the adjustments was based around the contingency reserve and the net deficit, and the two balance each other out. But this slide says we'll remain cash positive on that one. Then just a comment. I also thought that in the adjustments budget, I heard that entities had requested for additional funding, and it was not granted. But if I'm looking at the mass under expenditure on these entities, I'm wondering why they're asking for additional funding when they can't even spend what they've got. Thanks, Chair.
No, I want to ask this question. I've got Nomti's presentation, but I want, on a serious note, to find out in terms of your own independent assessment, not informed by the department. If you do get informed by them, how many departments that you think that are going to overspend by the year end? Was this robbed us in terms of that one? That's the first question. Linked to that question, I want to find out if the cabinet does have a position around around any department that is going to overspend. I know in the past, that's what bailed us out as oversight. Were assisted by the cabinet decision that said no department shall overspend. That's why one of the departments that projected billions of overspending last year could not go that far because there was the portfolio committee position as well as the cabinet position. I wanted to find out on that one. Then the Nomti, I didn't get you clearly when you were presenting around the conditional grants. Do you have a specific department whose conditional grant is going to be underspent? You know, I'm asking these silly questions because of one reason. We would want to take a different route. If we get informed by you, we are going to take a different route and then fire in the dark and then write as the Finance Portfolio Committee to such departments that one are projecting to overspend and two, the conditional grants that are likely to return to the National Revenue Fund. So that's my question on that one. To Lizelle, my friend, do you see that these things called entities are not performing in terms of spending? I'm specific. None of them is at 50% by the end of September. That's the worry that I have. But I am hearing when you are reading, I sounded that your voice was very weak when you were reading to some and indicating that they are going to break even. Do you believe that these entities that have committed themselves to break even by the end of financial year will do so? And I want you to understand what we dealt with in the last midterm. We raised a serious, no, it was not the midterm. It's when we were analyzing the spending of the budget of 21-22, where it was revealed that these things called the entities are the breeding ground of underspending. I don't remember how much, but it was way above $1 billion or very close to $1 billion of underspending by these things called the entities. I hope you got my question. I link it with the history of our own oversight over the entities and whatever. But having raised those, I want you to understand that the Finance Portfolio Committee is limping this time. What makes us limp is that we could not engage the departments and entities. But I want to find out from you, HOD and your team, as to whether we can trust that grouping behind you, that they are going to work closely with the portfolio committees in each and every entity and sensitize them on the issues so that our spending come the end of March 2023 is reasonable. I want to say we have fully spent, because when you look at the presentation by Nomti, I don't know whether my counting was right, that by September 30th, 9 of our 13 government departments had underspent their budget. That's the reality of the matter. That's what I was auditing, and they vary in different degrees. That's the problem that I have. There are those that are close, reasonable, but they themselves, including education, underspent by mid-year. When it sits at 99% instead of 100%, that's the indication. Then on the other side, Nomti, I posed that one. I audited that 4 of the departments overspent their budget by the middle of the financial year. That's what I have picked up. I have even the percentages and what I have. So I think you understand my plea from this weak man, very weak this time. I trust our team when we engage with department. It's not adversarially our own relationship, but we seem to be having the same objective. You will hear the political head quoting the cabinet decision around issues of spending, and then ourselves will be meeting halfway. But this time we can't meet halfway because we are not there where things are happening. I hope, Nomti, you picked up the frustration of this old man. Can we get the responses to the HOD and the accounting office and the team? And also the MEC, if she wants to come into the fray. That's why I know you are having a borrowed cap. I know, a borrowed cap. Or someone has hands up, or it came up late. Honorable Governor, can you come in? I was about to allow the Treasury to respond.
Sorry, Chairperson. Just that, my brain is a bit spongy today. Chairperson, my concern. You see, I recall in the presentation that DSD had requested the rollover of the conditional grant in relation to ECD. And there was a partial amount that was given back, but it would go to education because it's now gone to education. So in terms of the balance that would be required, what happens? Because now there's that rollover, that partial amount is actually funded from the provincial funds, right? So there's a deficit. Now, it means that there's going to be a funds short. A similar situation with the NSNP, right? It's also funded by provincial resources, right? Because education has overspent the budget. So what happens? I mean, is the NSNP program going to be able to sustain itself? And the learner transport, similarly. I'm just asking, Chairperson, because the provincial resources are drained and they've allocated these funds to the departments. But, in terms of the needs of the departments now, is it matching or are we going to be short? And what's going to happen if we are short?
Are you finished, Honorable Member? You are cutting. No,
off. I'm done, Chair. I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much. HOD and the team, if you could assist.
Thanks, Chairperson. I'll take a first stab at it, but there will be a few questions I'm sure that my colleagues will assist me with. If I can start with Honourable Rogers, your question about the graph versus what we presented in the adjustment. So they're two separate issues. What is presented in the graph at mid-year is our entire budget. So we get the budget is 140 billion, which National Treasury transfers to us in tranches, and the provincial bank who gives it to the departments, they spend it. So that is showing a positive balance. What the adjustments did was to see what other spare resources do we have, and we had 395 million, and we've allocated that to departments. So they're not the same thing. We've taken money and added it, so that graph will now have another 395 million added to it over the next few months. Why the entities requested for additional funding? Yes, we had exactly the same feeling. It was only, I think, 4 entities that had requested additional funding, but we weren't able to allocate money to them anyway. And I don't think even if we had funds, we would have given it to them. We look at their spending. We are concerned the spending is low for public entities. So when resources are available, we always look at who needs it the most. And in this case, I think the entities would have certainly not even come into the picture. Honourable Chair, in terms of how many departments do we think will overspend? So as at mid-year, the projected over was obviously inflated, if you want to say, in that we hadn't yet received the money from National Treasury for the 2021 wage agreement. If we add that back, certainly departments like education and health and public works will still show spending pressures because they've had spending pressures from before. Public works, we know, is because of the property rates. For health and education, it's the budget cuts that were affected against them that have rendered some of their posts unaffordable. Obviously, because of cash blocking, overspending is unlikely, but it does just push the problem into the next financial year. We have, over the last few months, been actively engaging with National Treasury on just hearing our plea that those two departments in particular, health and education, are battling. It's not by any fault of their own. The budget cuts we know have been bigger than just cutting increments if they were cutting posts. So we've had education and health 10 by 10s in particular. All provinces are singing the same song. And it does look very encouraging that over the MTF, we will get some additional relief on that side. So it doesn't assist us in this financial year, but what Cabinet has resolved is that there's going to be a budget lekgotla still held between now and the end of the financial year. And that budget lekgotla is asking all departments, now that the adjustments have happened, they know exactly what they're getting, what they're not getting, to just tell us what those pressures are, and so that as a province we can look at those who are showing underspending versus those who have pressures. Ideally, this should have happened before the adjustments, but because of various processes, it couldn't. And what it would mean is that we would have to write to National Treasury to ask for second adjustments to be tabled. So that cabinet lekgotla, or that budget lekgotla, is essential for us to be able to really assist those three departments in the main. I think the others will be okay. If you look at the projected spending, maybe social development is the other one we'll keep an eye on, but all the others I think are pretty much okay. We do keep alerting departments of their responsibilities in terms of Section 39, which is 39.1, which tells them that accounting officers must prevent unauthorized expenditure. And you'll see a lot of the movements in the adjustments were to try and offset some of those spending pressures. So the departments are definitely trying. They're not just sitting back and carrying on. Conditional grants that we think will underspend. Yeah, it's always quite a difficult question to answer at mid-year, because often at mid-year departments aren't looking that great. But towards the end of the year, if I look at last financial year, we actually spent quite well. It was only really the ECD grant, which was very much out of our hands. It was the National Department of Social Development. The National Nutrition Program grant, that's a natural thing. It's the March invoices will only be paid in April. So we didn't really battle. And also, if I compare us to other provinces, we've done well in the last 2-3 years in spending our conditional grants. So as much as some of them look low now, departments do seem to pick up. And if you look at the reasons in the mid-year report, it's often because tender processes are currently ongoing. So in the second half of the year, I think we can expect it to go up. Yeah, public entities are not performing. They're all spending less than 50%. I think that is true. A big part of that is also because of posts not being filled because of the rationalisation process. So it is a little bit of a vicious circle. And I think the sooner the rationalisation process reaches finality, some of them I think are a little bit paralysed by that, because you can't fill posts, and when you do, it's on contract, then you can't attract the people that you're looking for. Yeah, so I'm hoping the aim, like Liesl was saying, is for that to be resolved, that from 1 April, everybody is where they're supposed to be. Whether we will achieve that, only time will tell, but that's certainly the aim. And Liesl and her team have been sitting with the entities, getting the amalgamated budgets put together. So all those steps are being put into place. But yeah, there's still quite a few processes to get past. Yeah, our team will definitely work with the portfolio committees, supporting them. We're happy to share this report with the other portfolio committees, and our team, as we've always done, we've highlighted in the mid-year report all the issues that we felt we worried about with the departments and entities, that we've raised it as matters for discussion. So where we raise that, sometimes we're not quite happy with the answers we got when we went to print. So we are also going to follow that up with letters to each department, each entity, to tell us what where we haven't been sufficiently answered on questions we've had, but then also the portfolio committees, of course, will do exactly the same because the reports will be shared with them. I think if I can ask maybe Nelly or my HOD to help me with Honourable Governor's question, because I was busy focusing on looking for answers on the other questions.
Thanks, Chairperson, and to the members for the questions. I think on the NSNP, as Tanya has touched on that one, that it's the March invoices that are always paid in the following year. And what happened is National Treasury actually approved for the full rollover, but because the vote as a whole was overspent, then that rollover had to be funded from the provincial resources. It does put pressure on the province, but that's what it is. And unfortunately, it's always been like that in education. The learner transport as well, it is an area of concern. There is a lot of pressure, and now with also the increases in the fuel and the diesel and the petrol, I think the rates also, because they are linked to a CPI inflation, there is pressure on learner transport in the Department of Transport. Usually if we are in a cash positive situation in the adjustments, we always allocate additional funding for learner transport and to the public works for property rates, but this year we are unable to. So there will be pressure on the learner transport, even on the current existing coverage, there will be pressure, not to mention that we still have got areas that we have not covered. On DSD, the requested rollover for ECD, what was approved is what was committed. There was a bit of a challenge in that some of the contracts there that were funded by this grant were actually a responsibility of the national department, and so they couldn't verify some of the processes, so that's why we did not get the entire amount. So what National then indicated was that the rollover should actually be given to education, where the function currently is located. Again, on the ECD, it's split. There is an equitable share portion, and then there's a conditional grant portion. So the portion that DSD had to carry was the equitable share portion. So but there is pressure. Education have indicated that actually the ECT grant for this year is far less than what is required. As members would recall, when we tabled the main budget, we did indicate that the calculation for the ECT grant changed this year from the previous formula that was being used. So there is continuous engagement within the education sector in terms of that saying that National needs to fully fund this ECT function, because when then they change the formula, and then education finds itself having a shortfall. So there is pressure on ECT, and I think education will feel that pressure. But as I'm saying, in the education 10, that was one of the issues that is currently being cast. I think, Honourable Chair, you also asked the question as to whether our budget analysts can work with the sector portfolio committees to assist and make sure that departments fully spend their allocations. Yes, Chair, we can confirm that Treasury, as is usual, the budget analysts will assist the portfolio committees and the relevant departments. I think, Chair, maybe let me also add that as we started earlier last year, I think all the MECs have also been given a copy of the grey book, so they are aware of what we are briefing the committee about, because in some instances there's a disjuncture in the information between the accounting officer and the MEC, and when they come before the committee, they always say that they are not aware of the information. They should be aware, Honourable Chair. They have been given the full book, so each MEC should have by now gone through the chapter of their department in the book. So if there is information that the MECs are not aware of, they would have had an opportunity, hopefully before tomorrow's debate, to then engage with their accounting officers. I think that for departments project to overspend, I think Tanya has touched on this one. Education and health, the challenge is that they are projected over expenditure even after the allocation of the carry through of the wage agreement. It's on COE. And as a Treasury, the only tool that we have to make sure that you don't overspend is the famous cash blocking. But we can't cash block COE. We can cash block the other items. So yeah, we continue to work with education and with health. And as indicated, the budget lehodla, it's still outstanding, but education has in the last week gone back to Mincombat to indicate their pressures. And they are also alluding to what that will do to their PPNs. So we are hoping that there will be a robust conversation as to how we then control or manage that pressure in education. Health, I think the decision to keep the COVID contract staff for beyond the 6 months is showing a pressure. Again, I think that in the budget lehodla, that will have to be seriously interrogated so that we can make sure that we manage this particular pressure. Thank you, Honorable Chair.
I almost escaped. Honorable Chair, I wanted just to say that maybe my apologies because I went through the conditional grant section very fast, but we had highlighted the grants that a concern. So I think you could, you are within your right to maybe write to these departments and ask for plans because there could actually be plans to improve spending. So under agriculture, CASP and ILIMA, both of them had low spending at Midyear, with ILIMA at 2.2% of the budget. And human settlements is what you would have mentioned earlier. There's low spending against the informal settlements upgrading partnership grant and also the HSDG. And lastly, transport also had a slightly lower spending. So I think those, it will be good in keeping an eye on them, as you would have mentioned, just as we also are doing the same on them. I think it has been mentioned on the other ones on the pressures. I don't have to add anything. Thank you.
Thanks. No, that's fine, Chair. Chair, I just wanted to also just put in context what happened to departments at the beginning of this financial year. So in February and March, you'll recall that there was a halt on SCM processes with the preferential procurement regulations ruling. And many departments have cited that obviously they would have started the procurement process then so they can start in the beginning of the financial year. Then there was also the floods, and the floods had a massive impact on the departments. You know, they had to halt, look at their budgets, reprioritize, stop projects that hadn't started. So I think that has had some bearing on some of the key departments in terms of SCM processes starting quite late in the process. As you know, we also had the pre-award assessments that Treasury was required to do, and that resulted in some SCM processes being stopped and having to be restarted. So we did not have irregular expenditure. And then also just to make the members aware that National Treasury has taken a decision, they've already issued the circular that from the 15th of December to the 15th of January, no tenders can be awarded. The logic there, they're saying, is that businesses are closed and they won't see the awards. But I mean, that's a month that no awards will be made for government. So we did raise our concerns as Provincial Treasury, but they've already issued that circular. So I just wanted to put that in context. And just to also add what Nelly had indicated, we're also trying to improve the MEC's abilities in their oversight by enhancing the reports that the accounting officers are giving to them. So we issued a new circular, and it's a lot more extensive in terms of the kind of reports that need to go to the MECs so that they're aware not just of the expenditure, revenue, but also strategic risks, the audit reports, a whole lot of issues that need to be dealt with so that accounting officers make sure that they actually report to their MECs. Thanks, Chair.
Chair, you're muted.
Oh, that's why I made a call that my trust is on the budget analysts, because departments meet portfolio committees normally on monthly basis and in some cases on quarterly basis. I know we meet you, Treasurer. It's enough for us because we'll ask you sharp, pointed questions and then extract information. But other portfolio committees, I cannot speak for them, those that I don't belong to. That's why I am inviting the team at the back really to work very, very closely with the chairpersons of the portfolio committees on these areas that you have identified as Treasury to be concerns. So that's why we did so. Lizelle, anything that you would want to say about your babies?
Baby monsters. No, Chair, you're right. Just to put it into context about the historic underspending on slide 4, if you look at the total budget being 2.6 billion this year, of that, the rollover from the prior year is 1.084 billion. So they have got a problem. The same challenges that the departments have with SEM is exacerbated in the entities also because of capacity problems. The only one that we're seeing will be spending in line with their budget is the Zulu Royal House Trust, and they've actually have got pressures. All the others, we think that they are not realistic in their expenditure projections. If I can just quickly also continue with what Tanya said about the request, the additional funding is not because of budget pressures. It's because of specific projects that they cannot fund within their budgets. But our opinion is just if they cannot spend what is given to them, why are you trying to do more? So that was our view. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and honourable members. HOD has covered me on the one part, but I want to emphasize that we have distributed the documents to the MECs so that when they come before the committee, they don't seem to be lost like all others, but at least have an understanding and try to seek questions before they come to the committees. We're hoping that they are going to utilize that as expected. The other part, I think we did actually get a little bit of disturbance in how we wanted to spend the department wants to spend the budget in relation to the outcome of the court with relation to the procurement policy and hiccups that we have on that matter. Hence, we intervene, and the MEC did actually meet and try to intervene so that we are able to spend. That also caused some little bit of hiccups, but we're hoping that we will be able to guide the provincial departments and entities. Lastly, Chair, I think I must affirm the position of the Cabinet that we are saying that no department should overspend or underspend, but we are going to reaffirm further. Having had the portfolio and the legislature speaking on the matter, we still believe that it will be appropriate that when we get to the Cabinet Lekgotla next week, we'll be able actually to emphasize this point as well, so that all departments understand exactly where we stand and what is expected of all of them. We are going to monitor that on behalf of my colleague, because next week I'm hoping that she will be back. The things that we have bonded, unfortunately, with these guys, and now they think that I'm now supposed to be with them all the time. But we will try and ensure that all the areas that we are seeing as a little bit of getting to the red light for all the departments and also for the entities, we highlight that and then bring the resolution as the Cabinet of how we want to address them, so that when we finally come to the end of the year, we are able to break even in a number of departments and entities. I know these entities has not done good, but we'll try and push for the MECs to ensure that they spend the money. Thank you.
MEC would want to declare a few things One of them is that really we have allayed our fears. I don't know why I had concerns. There's one thing that I don't want to do is to be told all the time, tell me, and then I'm going to check it on the ground. There was no telling up to today. So now you have allayed my fears that no, things will come all right, despite the fact that we are not going to engage our own departments. But over and above, there's agreement with the detachment at the back that they are going to be an extension of the Finance Portfolio Committee on the areas that we were worried about. But to declare for the future, personally, and the Finance Portfolio Committee as a whole, the improvements that we are seeing, both in the spending and the reduction of overspending in government generally. We are noticing that. If you can go backwards from 2014 that side, you will realize what concerns Nomti was something that some of us did not even care. Those conditional grants, the way they were returning to the National Revenue Fund, CASP, ILIMA, and that one of science and technology in education and whatever. But those things are no longer giving us sleepless nights. If you hear that CASP and ILIMA, let's say, there was a year that they returned each more than 50 million rand. I can prove and go to the documents in my own garage, from my own garage. I keep them in the garage. But now when you hear that they are underspending in hundreds of thousands, although we don't want it, but what also created problems to many of them, as I suspect, is that it's not the question that they did not commit them, but it might be because it was a rollover for the second time. That was the thing that the Honorable Governor raised strongly with many government departments when we were scrutinizing the budget of the previous financial year. So that's what we picked up. But not bad. The babies that are a problem, but not the babies per se, but is lack of movement. But now when you don't feel vacancies there, for sure with some challenges and all that stuff. Those are the things that we would have to correct. But Honorable, let me say, thank you very much for accompanying your team that was coming to us. I don't know why I felt tomorrow I was going to be fighting. And I'm debating on behalf of my own party because I anticipated the worst. But now, I don't become emotional and fight for the sake of fighting. When the old man fights, you must know there's something that has troubled him. It doesn't fight for nothing. That's what it is. Thank you very much for accompanying your team, and then you will share it with your colleagues in the cabinet. We also want to thank the honorable members of the Finance Portfolio Committee for joining this briefing. I hope you are going to debate from the informed position without resolutions this time. We also wanted to thank the honorable members of the Standing Committee on Oversight, STACOF, for joining us virtually. Thank you very much, colleagues, HOD and your team. It is always a great pleasure to work with you. You know what we like with your own department is that you don't apply this thing of fear or favor. You become objective all the time. That's what a professional does. A professional will look at the situation, analyze it, and then come up with the way forward in the situation. Not to say this is the HOD, I'm going to sort her out. That's one of the committees that we have developed that were from overseas. Politicians of America, they wanted to find out which party are you? And this man jumped out. I didn't want to answer that question. I wanted to hear from them. He indicated that this delegation is composed of 4 different political parties. You know, when we went to America, we understood, we wanted to get certain information and also influence them because they are very poor. No, I don't know why I made a mistake. I told them in the face when we met one of the senator, and I said, but it sounds as if you are not doing oversight as politician. You pass the budget, but we can't pick up how do you follow it and all the like, which is an emphasis on our part. It was not for the first time I went to the US. When we went to New York, the similar thing. One official, when you ask them, how do politicians do oversight? I still know his name, is Mr. Oland. He said, but what could politicians do? Because they know nothing. We were educated on these things and whatever. Where did they start this thing? They said, hey, but this man is arrogant and all that. He forgets that you can read and adjust and understand the environment. So that's what it is all about. Thank you very much, Team Treasury, for the good work you are doing. You can see that the reports were not adopted. We're debating a bit late. Spy is advising me that if we could use lunch tomorrow. Yeah, because the reports are with you, both of them. Yeah, you are going to go through them and then see if you agree with them, you subtract certain things and all the stuff. But there was something that was missing when I went through. You did not mention that we did not do the hearings. Yeah, we missed that point. It's very important because people will be following our resolutions. On the midterm, there are no resolutions. So it's on that party's part. If I read correctly, I think that was missing. So colleagues will see tomorrow as to when do we meet. Please be reminded about the FFC, and they are virtual. Yeah, they were supposed to start at 4, but we're sorting our own things this side.